They handcuffed a black woman, deeming her suspicious. They didn't know they were the head of NASA. One call to the U.S. Space Force turned an ordinary street into a federal zone. Within an hour, their careers were ruined. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching this video from. The early morning sun bathed the marble steps of NASA headquarters in a warm golden hue, casting long shadows over Constitution Avenue. It was a quiet Tuesday in Washington, the kind where the city still lingered in the gentleness of dawn before politics, power, and panic took their usual grip. Dr. Marcia Hunt stepped out of her car, the soft hiss of her Tesla's closing door barely audible over the low hum of passing traffic. She stood still for a moment, breathing in the crisp air. Her mind, ever alert, cataloged her surroundings the way only someone trained to observe the universe would, precisely, silently, thoroughly. Dressed in a simple navy blue trench coat, charcoal slacks, and a cream blouse, Marcia looked every bit the unassuming civil servant she pretended to be in public. The truth was far more extraordinary. As the administrator of NASA, she was one of the most powerful scientific figures in the United States, a position earned through decades of perseverance, brilliance, and resistance to 1,000 small humiliations that had tried to chip away at her worth. She had just returned from Brussels the night before, where she chaired a closed-door summit with top scientists and global defense representatives. The topic had been classified: orbital security cooperation and strategic satellite integration, a mission so sensitive that even the Department of Defense had deferred to her leadership. Now, though, she wanted only one thing: coffee. Marcia walked across the street to the small cafe she always visited, tucked between a bank and a florist. It wasn't flashy or famous, which was exactly why she liked it. The barista recognized her, gave a knowing nod, and started on her usual: double espresso, 2 sugars, no milk. She didn't linger. Today was not a day for conversations. In her hands was a secure, fingerprint-locked briefcase containing encrypted files. It was one of only 2 physical copies in existence, the contents of which were destined for a locked safe inside a sub-basement level of the Pentagon. As she exited the cafe, cup in hand, her calm demeanor concealed the calculus running in her head. The next 48 hours would determine the trajectory of a multi-billion-dollar launch program, one which could shape the U.S. government's role in global space dominance for decades. But she wasn't thinking about any of that when she crossed back to her car. Instead, she was thinking about whether she had remembered to feed her dog, Orpheus, before the flight from Europe. A patrol car idled half a block down. Inside, Officer Ray Lanning sipped his own coffee, black, bitter, and far too hot. His partner, Officer Kyle Bridges, leaned forward slightly, squinting through the windshield at the woman walking toward the parked Tesla. Lanning noticed the movement and followed his gaze. "That your car?" Kyle muttered. "She's getting into it," Ray replied. "Looks like it." "Plates federal," Kyle said. "Unmarked. That's high-level clearance." Ray shrugged. "Or a fake. People print stuff like that all the time. Or maybe her boyfriend's a lawyer." Kyle's fingers drummed on the steering wheel. "Still, let's check it out. You never know." Marcia didn't notice them watching. She set the coffee on the roof of the car, reached into her coat pocket, and withdrew her security badge to scan the vehicle's biometric lock. The handle clicked. She opened the door, set the briefcase inside, and retrieved the coffee. That was when the patrol car moved. It approached slowly, deliberately. The flash of red and blue lights activated not with the usual abruptness of urgency, but with an eerie casualness, like the beginning of a slow-burning interrogation. Marcia turned her head slightly, watching them pull up behind her. Her expression didn't change. Ray Lanning stepped out first. He adjusted his belt and approached with the relaxed but alert posture of someone who believed the uniform gave him the right to interrupt anything, anytime, anywhere. Kyle followed, staying a few feet behind. The two of them walked with purpose, eyes sharp. "Mornin', ma'am," Ray said, keeping one hand near his holster. "Is this your vehicle?" Marcia blinked once, slowly. "Yes." "You have ID on you?" She reached into her coat, retrieved her NASA administrator's badge, and held it out. Ray didn't take it. He looked at it from a distance and scoffed. "NASA? Really?" "Yes." Kyle stepped closer. "Can I see your driver's license too?" "Of course." She complied, retrieving it without hesitation. Ray snatched it, examined it briefly, then handed it to Kyle. His eyes never left her face. "What are you doing here this morning?" Ray asked. Marcia regarded him steadily. "Getting coffee. I work across the street." "You're parked in a federal zone." "That's correct." Ray walked around her car, eyeing the clean lines, the government plate, the lack of anything resembling disorder. "Car registered to you?" "No. It's a fleet vehicle. Government issued." Kyle returned. "License checks out," he said, but his tone suggested that was almost a problem for him. Ray tilted his head, pretending to think. "I don't know," he said. "You're awful calm. Most people get nervous when police walk up." "I have no reason to be nervous." "That right?" He stepped forward. "Mind if we take a look in the vehicle?" "I do mind, actually," Marcia replied, her tone even. "There is classified material inside. You do not have the authority." That was it. The moment the encounter shifted, neither man had the background or clearance to understand what she had just told them. The words classified material had only ever meant one thing to them: someone hiding something. Ray moved fast, stepping into her personal space. "Put your hands on the car." "I'm sorry?" "You heard me. Now." Marcia's breath caught, not from fear, but from astonishment. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew the look in his eyes. She had seen it during congressional testimony, at security checkpoints, in boardrooms. That mix of superiority and indignation that only appeared when a woman, especially a black woman, refused to shrink. She put her coffee down. "What is the charge, officer?" "Suspicious behavior," Kyle offered. "Possible falsification of federal ID. You can't be serious." Ray didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, grabbed her wrist, and turned her toward the vehicle. She offered no resistance, but the force he used made her wince. He yanked both arms behind her back and snapped the cuffs closed. The cold metal bit into her skin. From across the street, a young man in a Georgetown University hoodie froze mid-step, pulling out his phone. A woman inside the cafe dropped her cup. Someone gasped audibly. Marcia Hunt, director of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was now leaning against her car in handcuffs. Kyle opened the passenger side of the Tesla and looked inside. The briefcase was still there, locked and silently blinking red as it detected unauthorized proximity. He reached toward it, then yanked his hand back. It was humming faintly. Nothing audible to them, but Marcia recognized the sequence. A biometric alarm. If tampered with again, it would send a silent signal to NASA's security network and initiate a response protocol. "Bag's locked," Kyle said. "Looks techie." Ray didn't care. "We'll get it opened downtown." Marcia remained silent. Her jaw tightened. She could feel the eyes on her, feel the moment stretching into something irreversible. The cuffs were tight, too tight, and biting into the bone. This, she thought, was not how this day was supposed to begin. But the next move would be hers, not through protest, not through pleading, but through the channels only she had access to. The next chapter of this moment wouldn't be played out in a squad car or a police station. It would begin with a phone call. The cold of the metal handcuffs began to bite into Marcia's wrists as she stood pressed against the hood of her government-issued Tesla, her posture rigid, her breathing slow and deliberate. Years of military-adjacent training had taught her to still her body, to control what could be controlled. But even she, accustomed to stressors that would break lesser minds, launch failures, hostile congressional hearings, classified mission setbacks, could not suppress the primal surge of humiliation that now rose in her chest like a slow, burning tide. The pavement beneath her feet, the dull murmur of the gathering onlookers, the hot beam of morning sun across her back, all of it became distant, background texture to the single, razor-sharp thought in her mind. They don't know who I am. Behind her, Officer Ray Lanning holstered his cuffs with casual satisfaction, as if he had just corrected a minor error in a parking violation. He tapped the side of his sunglasses with 2 fingers and walked a few paces away, speaking into his shoulder-mounted radio with the swagger of someone who believed his authority would never be questioned. His partner, Officer Kyle Bridges, continued to peer into the Tesla, glancing occasionally at the strange blinking case on the passenger seat, uncertain whether to touch it again. He didn't like the way it pulsed, a soft, deliberate rhythm that felt alive. She didn't even flinch, Kyle muttered over his shoulder. That briefcase, it's locked like Fort Knox. Ray glanced over his shoulder and smirked. Probably just one of those expensive laptop cases. Some CEO thinks she's somebody. He turned back toward Marcia. Bet you're regretting that attitude now, huh? Marcia didn't answer. She didn't move. The cuffs were too tight. Her hands were beginning to numb, but she refused to show it. Her eyes tracked the movement of the crowd around her. A young woman in scrubs stood on the corner, arms crossed, watching in horror. A delivery driver leaned against his van, phone in hand, already recording. Across the street, inside the cafe, the barista had stopped making drinks. Her eyes were locked on Marcia, recognition dawning slowly. The weight of the moment pressed against time itself, every second stretched, bloated by injustice. Kyle finally pulled away from the vehicle and walked toward his partner. There's nothing in the system on her. License is clean, badge scans, but I don't know. This feels off. Ray shrugged. Off how? I mean, what if she really is who she says she is? Ray snorted. You think the head of NASA is walking around by herself, getting coffee in a trench coat? Come on, Kyle. Use your head. Important people don't do that. She's bluffing. Marcia heard every word, and still she said nothing. Ray moved in front of her, studying her face now, trying to get a reaction. Let me guess. You're one of those activist types, huh? Got yourself a fake badge and a good car, hoping to make a statement. He chuckled. Well, here's your statement, lady. He reached down and adjusted the cuffs tighter deliberately. The pain lanced through her arms, but her expression didn't change. She's calm, Kyle said again, this time more quietly. Too calm. Ray was about to respond when a sharp, mechanical click echoed from the vehicle. Both officers turned. The briefcase had stopped blinking red. Instead, a thin green line now traced along its edge, glowing faintly. Neither man understood what it meant, but instinctively they stepped back. Marcia's mind was already working 3 steps ahead. The case had detected multiple failed access attempts. According to the internal AI, a protocol tested only in the most extreme scenarios, it had now activated a remote link to the Space Operations Center. That wasn't enough. They needed confirmation, authorization, escalation, and it had to come from her. But to do that, she needed access to a communication device. She turned her head slightly, speaking for the first time since being handcuffed. Her voice was low, deliberate, firm. "You're making a grave mistake." Ray rolled his eyes. "Oh, I'm shaken. You don't have jurisdiction over what's in that vehicle." "What I have," Ray snapped, "is a woman acting suspiciously, refusing a lawful search, and carrying what looks like a damn science fair project. So how about you save the big words and tell me where you really got that ID?" Marcia closed her eyes for a moment. Behind her calm exterior, a storm gathered. Her thoughts scanned years of protocols, codes, emergency contingencies. There was one she could still use, a failsafe designed for precisely this kind of scenario, though never intended for deployment on domestic soil. But that didn't matter now. She had warned them. Across the street, the young man in the Georgetown hoodie stepped closer, phone in hand. He had been recording since the moment they shoved her against the hood. His name was Isaac Okafor, a senior in aerospace engineering. He recognized her, not from the badge or the briefcase, but from the lecture she gave at his university the previous fall. He had sat in the front row. She had spoken about Mars habitation, the ethics of exploration, the imperative to protect human dignity even in hostile environments. He realized he was watching someone violate that dignity right now. Isaac cleared his throat and approached, cautious. "Excuse me, officers?" Ray turned sharply. "Back off." Isaac raised both hands. I think I know who she is. That's Dr. Marcia Hunt. She runs NASA." Ray laughed, actually laughed. "Buddy, I don't care if she runs the moon. Step away." Marcia didn't look at Isaac directly, but spoke again. "Do you have your phone?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. I need you to make a call." Ray took a step forward. Hey, I said back off." Kyle put a hand on his partner's arm. "Hold on, let's hear this." Isaac hesitated. Marcia recited a number. Not a personal contact, not even a government extension. It was a 12-digit emergency protocol number, a direct line to the secure communications hub at Vandenberg Space Force Base, a line that only a handful of people in the country even knew existed. Isaac looked confused, but obediently typed it in and pressed call. The phone rang once, then twice, then it connected. "Secure line, identify," came the voice on the other end. Cold, military, efficient. Isaac held up the phone. "She asked me to call this number. It's Dr. Marcia Hunt. She's being detained." There was a pause. Then a sound Isaac would never forget. The click of multiple systems going live in the background. Radios, commands, echoing terminals, people moving. "Location?" the voice demanded. Isaac gave the intersection. "She's handcuffed. 2 officers. She hasn't resisted." Another pause, then, "Put her on the line." Isaac looked up helplessly. "She can't. Her hands. She's cuffed." Ray stepped forward again. "Give me that damn phone." But before he could reach it, the voice on the line cut in sharply. "This is General James Conwell, Commander, United States Space Force. Stand down immediately." Ray froze. Kyle paled. Marcia lifted her head, her voice unwavering. "This is Administrator Marcia Hunt. I'm unlawfully detained. Badge numbers are 41276 and 39812. I request immediate validation and response." Conwell's voice was steel. "Acknowledged. Hold position. Do not let them move her. Reinforcements en route. Space Command is activating Tier 3 protocol." "What the hell is Tier 3? Ray whispered. Kyle didn't answer. He was already reaching for his radio, fingers trembling. Across the street, the cafe door slowly closed. Inside, the barista was calling someone. The crowd grew thicker. A man in a suit stepped out of a nearby building, recognized Marcia, and immediately pulled out his phone. The moment was no longer private. It was national. The echo of sirens began faintly in the distance. Not the erratic whoop of local patrols, but the controlled, fast-approaching rumble of federal vehicles. SUVs black, government-plated. With them would come agents, military liaisons, and, very likely, cameras. Marcia remained perfectly still. Her hands were going numb, her back ached from the angle, and the heat rising from the car hood was starting to sting. But she didn't care. The shift had begun. The storm was coming. Not for her, but for those who had dared to put their hands on her. She had warned them, and now the sky would answer. The air around Marcia had shifted. The moment her name was confirmed by General James Conwell himself, the atmosphere on that Washington street transformed from casual tension into electric pressure. It was no longer a confrontation. It had become a high-level national incident. The bystanders sensed it. Isaac, still holding the phone with the connection open, stood frozen in place as if it had become a weapon too powerful for his hands. The cafe across the street was quiet, its patrons pressed against the windows like witnesses to a slow-forming storm. Even the traffic had begun to thin, as if the city itself understood something bigger was happening here. Marcia remained still, the heat of the hood beneath her arms slowly fading as adrenaline dulled the sensation. The cuffs dug into her wrists, but her composure held. Every breath was measured, every second under control. She had trained for chaos. Not this kind, perhaps, not the petty, condescending cruelty of street-level abuse, but chaos nonetheless. Her mind did what it always did, adapted, aligned, responded. Officer Kyle Bridges was no longer moving with certainty. He was standing a few feet from the car, his hand near his holstered radio, but his eyes darted between his partner, the crowd, and the strange, unspoken authority that had taken root in the air. It was Ray Lanning who still clung to the illusion of dominance. He paced in a slow, tight circle, muttering under his breath, jaw clenched, knuckles tight. The mention of Tier 3 protocol had meant nothing to him, but the tone in Conwell's voice, the sudden vulnerability in his own partner's stance, and the unnerving confidence of the woman he had handcuffed were starting to unravel something inside him. Ray approached Isaac. "End the call, now." Isaac didn't flinch. "It's not my call." "I said, hang up the phone." Before Ray could snatch it, a voice came again through the speaker. "Do not interfere with that phone or the individual holding it. This line is now under real-time military surveillance. Your movements are being tracked. Officer Ray Lanning, badge 41276. You're currently in violation of Federal Code 1382. Kyle's mouth parted slightly. "They know our badges." "They're watching us," Ray said, incredulous. "From where?" Marcia spoke without turning her head. "Every satellite in low Earth orbit capable of visual telemetry just received a ping from Vandenberg and Spacecom. You're being watched from 500 kilometers above. That's where." Isaac slowly lowered the phone. "What do I do now?" Marcia's voice was steady. "Just hold it. You've done enough." A buzz came over Kyle's shoulder radio. The tone was different. Not local dispatch, not city command. It was encrypted, hard-lined, military. The kind of frequency local cops never accessed unless they were already in trouble. Kyle stepped away, pressing a hand to his ear. The voice that met him was crisp and precise. "Officer Bridges, this is Agent Lauren Chow with the Department of Defense Liaison Office. We have confirmed the detainment of a high-ranking federal asset currently under Tier 3 protective status. Your compliance is required for de-escalation." Kyle looked at Ray, whose face had gone pale. "What's Tier 3? He whispered. Marcia answered for them. Tier 3 is the protocol for unauthorized interference with a member of the Strategic Scientific Executive Corps. It's rarely used and never domestically. But now you've made history. Ray turned toward her. "This is crazy. You think anyone's going to believe?" Sirens approached, fast and layered. Not the shrill, chaotic sounds of emergency vehicles, but the low, controlled blare of federal convoys. 3 black SUVs came into view, unmarked but unmistakable. One carried a small flag mounted on the right side, blue, white, and silver, the insignia of the United States Space Force. They didn't slow as they rounded the corner. They stopped in unison with the precision of military choreography. Doors opened. From the first vehicle, a tall woman in a black tactical suit stepped out, eyes shielded by mirrored sunglasses. She approached with 2 agents in tow. The woman held out a federal badge, one that shimmered with a silver eagle pressed over a starfield background. "Agent Chow, Department of Defense Liaison Office. This area is now under restricted operational control." Ray took a step forward. "This is a public street." "Not anymore." Kyle instinctively moved aside. Ray didn't. Chow turned to the agents. "Get those cuffs off her." One of the operatives moved to Marcia's side and produced a universal override key. With a soft click, the metal restraints released. Marcia flexed her fingers slowly as sensation returned. She turned around, lifted her chin, and locked eyes with Ray for the first time. He looked at her now, not as a suspect, but as someone he could no longer deny was far above him in every possible way. "I want a formal debrief," Chow said, addressing the agents. "Full extraction of video from the cruiser dash cam and all body cams. We secure the scene. We detain both officers until military legal affairs arrives." "You're detaining us?" Ray barked. "No," she replied coolly. "You're being secured under internal review. There's a difference." Another convoy vehicle arrived, this one marked with Pentagon plates. From it stepped a man in full Space Force uniform, silver-gray fabric gleaming under the sun, epaulets marked with stars. He was tall, with short-cropped hair and a face carved by years of combat strategy and diplomacy. General James Conwell himself. The crowd that had gathered instinctively moved back, parting to let him through. He didn't approach the officers. He walked straight to Marcia. "Administrator Hunt," he said quietly, "we are at your disposal." Marcia nodded once. "Thank you, General. I trust the response was swift." "Less than 7 minutes." She looked at Ray and Kyle. "Long enough." Conwell turned to Chow. "We're escalating to Tier 2. All incident data is to be forwarded to the Joint Chiefs. NASA Security Division will compile the civilian footage. I want internal review to begin tonight." "Already underway," Chow confirmed. Marcia looked toward Isaac, who was still holding the phone, eyes wide. "Thank you," she said to him gently. "You did something brave." He opened his mouth, but no words came. She turned back to Conwell. "Is the briefcase secure?" "Yes." "We activated the onboard defense system once telemetry flagged interference. It's being transported separately." Ray's confusion had twisted into outrage. "You can't do this. We didn't know. We had no idea who she was." Conwell's voice was quiet but lethal. "And that's the problem." The area had transformed. Yellow perimeter tape now sealed off the block. Uniformed Space Force operatives monitored entry and exit. Body cams were being uploaded in real time to encrypted servers. Drones hovered above, capturing 360-degree footage. The narrative had changed. No longer was this a local police incident. This was now a matter of national security, federal misconduct, and political optics. And at the center of it all stood a woman who had said nothing in her own defense until she knew the system would defend her properly. Marcia Hunt had not shouted, begged, or fought. She had activated a protocol. And now the full weight of that protocol was visible to everyone who had ever doubted her authority. She stepped forward. The cuffs lay on the ground behind her, gleaming in the sun like forgotten relics. She did not look back. The cuffs lay in the street like evidence of a crime long denied by those who committed it. Discarded and shining beneath the high sun, they were no longer instruments of authority but symbols of collapse. Marcia Hunt stood tall, her wrists tingling as blood returned to her fingers, the sensation almost inconsequential compared to the satisfaction of knowing the machine had begun to turn. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but in precise, calculated justice. The agents from the Department of Defense moved efficiently. Their arrival, which just moments ago had felt like a sudden ripple in the air, had now become a full wave washing over the block. Yellow perimeter tape bloomed like a wallflower in full panic, stretching from pole to pole, anchored by armed federal presence on all corners. The murmuring of the crowd, dozens now, some recording, others whispering in growing understanding, began to shift in tone. Confusion turned to awe. Curiosity to quiet reverence. They didn't know the full story, but they could read the body language. The black woman who had been shoved against her own vehicle, hands bound, now stood taller than the officers who had arrested her. Ray Lanning was sweating, not from heat, but from something colder. Dread. The buzz of military radios filled the air with coded terms he didn't understand. There was a protocol being followed, something high above his pay grade, and the weight of it pressed into his spine like gravity. He kept glancing at Kyle, searching for shared validation, but found none. Kyle was already receding into silence, arms folded across his chest, shoulders hunched, eyes down. From across the street, Agent Chow barked a new series of orders. "I want full control of that cruiser. Remove local access. Extract body cam footage. Secure perimeter cameras." Federal tech officers swarmed the patrol car like bees to a hive. One of them pulled a module from the dash and inserted a drive into the port. Another agent collected both Ray's and Kyle's body cameras, their data cables now trailing into a hardened server unit stationed behind one of the black SUVs. A gray van, marked with the seal of the National Security Council, pulled into the scene next, bringing with it an unmistakable signal. This was no longer just a disciplinary matter. It had become a federal review. An officer stepped out holding a silver case with the biometric locks and walked directly to Chow, whispering something that made her lips tighten. "Administrator Hunt," Chow said, approaching Marcia with precision, "this entire event has now been flagged as a national-level security breach. The Joint Chiefs are being briefed. A temporary media blackout has been requested through FCC channels, but we can't stop what's already been shared publicly." "I expected as much," Marcia replied calmly. "The Internet doesn't follow protocol." Chow hesitated, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, we also received a preliminary internal alert from NASA's security network. Your briefcase's biometric sequence transmitted a full data pulse. It pinged NORAD, Lockheed's test lab, and the orbital satellite control ring simultaneously." Marcia nodded slowly. Then our window is smaller than I hoped. We're rerouting the asset to the Pentagon directly. Escorts already in place. The young man, Isaac, still stood nearby, the phone in his hand now silent but still warm. The call had ended, but its weight lingered. A federal agent approached him gently, asking for the device. Isaac hesitated, then passed it over. He met Marcia's eyes once more before stepping back into the crowd, swallowed again by anonymity. Inside the cruiser, technicians discovered something alarming. One of the officers, perhaps instinctively or out of arrogance, had tried to override the locking system on the briefcase. That single touch had activated a cascade of defensive subroutines. The resulting log was time-stamped, geotagged, and transmitted to a secure government cluster in less than a second. Every keystroke, every command input, every failed authorization, recorded and preserved. Agent Chow turned to the technician. "Does that qualify as tampering under Section 12, 984? "Without a doubt," he replied. "This wasn't just negligence. It triggered a Category 5 breach." Chow made a note. "Prepare a parallel referral to the Office of the Inspector General. These two are going under federal review, possibly espionage-related." Ray Lanning lost his composure then. "You can't be serious," he shouted, gesturing wildly. "Espionage? I'm a cop. I was doing my job. We didn't know who she was." "And yet," Chow said coolly, "you ignored her credentials, dismissed her warnings, and restrained a strategic-level asset. That's not just ignorance. That's dereliction of duty on a federal scale." He turned to Kyle for support, but his partner said nothing. Marcia watched them from the edge of the cordon. Her face betrayed no triumph, no anger, no satisfaction, only weariness, long-earned, deeply worn. General Conwell reapproached, now accompanied by a new figure, a woman in her 50s, dressed in civilian clothes but with the bearing of command. Marcia recognized her immediately. Elizabeth Rowe, Deputy Director of National Security Affairs. If Rowe was here, the implications had already reached the Situation Room. "Administrator Hunt," Rowe said, nodding respectfully, "I want to apologize on behalf of the United States government." "That won't be necessary," Marcia said. "Not yet. We've already initiated a complete review of incident protocol between local enforcement and federal personnel. This won't happen again." "It shouldn't have happened at all," Marcia answered. Rowe paused, then inclined her head. "You're right." At that moment, 3 military journalists arrived, members of a closed press pool sanctioned by the Department of Defense. They began documenting the scene from a distance. Though a media blackout had been requested, the internal narrative was already being shaped. It would be necessary. History required witnesses, especially when the truth cut too deep to speak plainly. A report buzzed through Chow's earpiece. She turned slightly, then addressed Marcia. "Ma'am, the internal analysis team just flagged one of the officer's personal devices. He ran a background check on you 3 minutes before the arrest. The full scan came back with your federal ID, clearance level, and NASA credentials." Marcia's face went still. "So they knew," Chow finished. "Yes," Marcia said quietly. "They knew, and they did it anyway." The words landed like iron. Around them, the city pulsed unaware. Office workers passed blocks away with coffee and phones and playlists. Tourists took photos at monuments. But here, on this sun-washed corner, justice was being coded in real time. Not in speeches, but in files and forensics and quiet orders spoken into encrypted channels. The officers were separated then. Ray was taken into custody by federal agents and placed in an unmarked vehicle. Kyle followed without protest. Neither was placed in restraints. That would come later once the reviews began. As the sun climbed higher, Conwell gestured toward the last remaining SUV. "Shall we, Administrator?" Marcia glanced once more at the crowd, then stepped forward and entered the vehicle. Inside, the hum of encrypted communication filled the air. She placed her hands on her lap, her fingers still tender, and leaned back against the cool leather of the seat. The door closed with a final, definitive sound. As the SUV pulled away, the cordon lifted. The crowd dispersed, their recordings already rippling through the country's digital bloodstream. What had started as a simple stop on a quiet street was now a thread tugging at the fabric of American security, race, and power. And somewhere, far above, in the black stillness of orbit, a series of satellites adjusted their alignment ever so slightly. Watching, waiting, ready. The ride to the Pentagon was conducted in silence. The armored SUV moved through Washington streets like a vessel parting water, unobstructed, unquestioned, unchallenged. Inside, Marcia sat with her hands resting lightly on her knees, her shoulders squared, eyes staring ahead, though her mind moved elsewhere. The sting of the handcuffs remained, a dull ache radiating up her forearms, but she did not rub them. The pain was useful. It grounded her in the moment, reminded her that what had occurred was real, not just another in the long list of indignities she had encountered in her rise through the ranks. But this time, something had changed. This time, the world had seen. Agent Chow sat across from her, tablet in hand, reading incoming reports. The digital cascade of information was constant. Data packets from the cruiser's body cams, transcriptions of the radio chatter, a forensic summary of the Tesla's biometric case response, and a full inventory of the communications log from the Space Force Command Center. Marcia didn't need to see it. She knew the system. She had helped design parts of it. General Conwell remained on his secure call until they passed the Capitol. He ended it with a clipped confirmation, nodded to Chow, and turned to Marcia with a look that was both respectful and resigned. "The President is aware," he said. "I assumed as much. He's asked for a full report by morning. Joint Chiefs are preparing an internal review. There's already talk of a formal inquiry into interagency jurisdictional abuse." Marcia gave a slight nod but said nothing. The vehicle passed through the Pentagon's south entrance, past the rows of stone-faced guards and surveillance equipment. It descended into the underground motorcade bay, where a half-dozen federal security officers stood in wait. The doors opened in sync, and Marcia stepped out into the dim, pressurized atmosphere of institutional power. No press was allowed this deep, and the hush that followed her footsteps down the corridor was the kind that usually accompanied nuclear briefings or clandestine conflict briefings. The building seemed to know who she was now, in a way it hadn't hours before. She was escorted to a secure debriefing room just off the Strategic Intelligence Suite. Inside were 3 individuals: Elizabeth Rowe from National Security Affairs, a man from the Office of the Inspector General, and Admiral Steve Carver of the Defense Oversight Committee. None of them smiled when she entered. No handshakes were offered, just quiet acknowledgement, as though they were already bracing for the implications. Rowe began without delay. "Administrator Hunt, your incident is now classified as a Tier 2 federal security breach with direct violation of strategic asset protection protocols. We have reviewed the preliminary evidence. We are prepared to act." "What's the scope?" Marcia asked. The Inspector General's representative, a gray-haired man with piercing eyes and a clipped tone, answered. We've confirmed that Officer Ray Lanning accessed your federal file 10 minutes prior to the stop. That included your photograph, your clearance level, your operational status with NASA, and your travel log from Brussels. So, it wasn't ignorance, Marcia said. It was choice. Willful misconduct, yes, the man replied. But we're going further. The fact that he attempted to override your briefcase's security lock escalates this beyond a simple abuse of power. We're referring this as attempted interference with a classified federal asset. Espionage? She asked, not in disbelief but clarification. Obstruction, unauthorized access, and violation of federal cybersecurity protocols. If intent can be proven, and we're close, it becomes a criminal matter at the highest level. Marcia absorbed this without a flicker of reaction. And the partner? Officer Kyle Bridges is currently under review. He accessed the records after the stop began, but didn't act to de-escalate. Negligence and complicity are on the table. He's not under arrest yet, but that could change. Rowe leaned forward. We want to make this clear, Marcia. You're not just a victim here. You're the catalyst. What happens next will affect federal training doctrine, police-military interface, even public trust. We'll support you in any way we can. But you need to speak. Marcia held their gazes one at a time. I will, but I'll do it in the right forum. She stood, walked to the door, and paused. Schedule the Senate committee tomorrow morning. The request hung in the air like a thunderclap. When she left the debriefing room, the halls were quieter. Word had spread, not about the details, those were still classified, but about the weight of it. People noticed things. A new level of security at the NASA office. A sudden hush in the Defense Council wing. Even the cafeteria staff stood a little straighter when she passed. Back in her own office, Marcia sat for a moment at her desk before summoning her assistant. I want every complaint filed against those officers in the last 5 years, she said. Traffic stops, civil suits, disciplinary reports, everything. Yes, ma'am. And flag any incidents that involved women of color, even if they didn't escalate. Yes, ma'am. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. The ache in her wrists had dulled into a memory now, but her mind was sharper than ever. The next day began with a sunrise cloaked in soft clouds. A line of black government vehicles rolled into the Capitol complex. Inside one of them, Marcia adjusted the cuffs of her tailored suit and pressed her palm flat over the briefcase now secured beside her. It had been retrieved, checked, and sealed again. Its contents never opened. The chain of custody was intact. Senators filed into the hearing room, their expressions neutral but expectant. Cameras were forbidden, but transcripts would be made public within hours. The committee chair, a woman from New Hampshire with a history in civil rights litigation, nodded solemnly as Marcia took her seat. She was sworn in. Her statement began without dramatics. She described the events of the morning prior. Her arrival, the coffee, the interaction, the arrest, the phone call, the response. She did not embellish, she did not speculate. Then she paused. I am not here today as a victim, she said. I am here as proof. Silence fell over the room. I am proof that even those of us at the highest levels of service are not immune to bias, to dismissal, to violence. My credentials did not protect me. My record did not protect me. My contribution to national security did not protect me. I was treated as a threat because I did not look like what power is expected to look like. A murmur of shifting papers followed. But I am also proof of another truth, that systems, when built well, can respond. That silence, when used strategically, can carry further than shouting. That protocol, when honored, can overpower prejudice. By the time she finished, the room was still. Her words were already being typed by aides, summarized into briefings echoed in corners of power where they could no longer be ignored. That afternoon, the officers were formally suspended without pay. Within 72 hours, both were charged, one with willful violation of federal law, the other with dereliction of duty. Outside NASA headquarters, bouquets began to appear at the front steps. Not flowers of sympathy, but of solidarity. Notes from young engineers, handwritten messages from students, printed letters from other countries' space agencies. Marcia didn't ask for them. She didn't speak of them, but she noticed. In the basement of the Department of Defense, a special panel was convened to begin rewriting the guidelines for local federal engagement. Marcia was asked to contribute. She did, with precision and detachment. When the press finally caught up to her days later as she exited a closed meeting, she offered only one sentence. "We do not orbit injustice," she said. "We correct our trajectory." Then she walked away. The morning after her testimony, the city felt altered, not in its architecture or sound, but in atmosphere, an intangible shift that hummed beneath the routines of power and the rituals of government. The news hadn't officially broken, but rumors had already raced ahead, feeding a kind of electricity into the veins of Washington. Staffers whispered in hallways. Assistants hovered at screens, refreshing feeds that had been scrubbed clean the night before by national security requests. Still, the tremor remained. Marcia Hunt arrived at NASA headquarters with the same composure she had always worn. The guards at the front entrance, normally formal but relaxed, stood straighter than usual. One of them nodded at her with a quiet kind of reverence, not just as an administrator but as someone who had walked through fire and emerged taller. She nodded back, said nothing, and proceeded into the building. Her first meeting was with her executive team. The room was filled with scientists, engineers, project leads, many of whom had worked with her for years but had never seen her quite this way. Not just composed, not merely brilliant, but unshakable in a way that went beyond strategy or leadership. Something deeper, something earned. They didn't ask about what happened. They didn't need to. The footage had spread too quickly, the Senate testimony had been transcribed and quoted, and even those outside the scientific community had begun to understand the weight of what had taken place. Marcia opened the meeting with updates on project milestones, revised mission timelines, and budget reallocations. She made no mention of arrests or hearings, of charges or political fallout. Only when the room settled into its rhythm did she look up and address the unsaid. "What happened to me," she said, "was not isolated. It is part of a system of assumptions that reach far beyond any single incident. We deal in physics and mathematics and truths that require no interpretation. But outside these walls, perception is often more powerful than fact." No one interrupted, no one fidgeted. "I won't let what happened be reduced to a moment. It must become momentum." The room exhaled as one. Elsewhere in the city, the press began to catch up. The video of Marcia's detainment, once restricted through federal channels, had been leaked, whether by a sympathetic aide, an app developer who cracked a side stream of the live-streamed Senate feed, or an anonymous whistleblower. It was now out in the world. Not heavily edited. Not sensationalized. Just raw footage, 12 uninterrupted minutes of her being stopped, questioned, disrespected, restrained, and finally identified. The reaction was immediate. Cable news ran the video on a loop, analysts parsing every moment. Newspapers printed stills with headlines that teetered between outrage and awe. Think pieces flooded editorial columns. Protest groups cited the incident as proof of systemic rot. Academics used it in lectures about power and protocol. Within hours, the hashtag #HuntProtocol began trending, repurposed by activists, students, military veterans, and even celebrities. It came to symbolize more than the actions of one woman. It stood for precision in the face of prejudice, for response without retaliation, for dignity that did not yield. In one viral clip, a talk show host said, "Marsha Hunt didn't just de-escalate. She redefined what escalation means." The Justice Department, feeling the heat of public scrutiny, moved quickly. Within 48 hours of the leak, both officers involved were officially indicted. Officer Ray Lanning faced charges of unlawful detention, obstruction of federal protocol, and willful misconduct involving classified materials. Officer Kyle Bridges, while not the initiator, was charged with gross negligence and failure to act in the face of misconduct. The charges came with a press release. But the people didn't need an announcement to understand what they had seen. Across universities, posters of Marsha and her NASA pin, standing tall while the cuffs were being removed, began appearing alongside quotes from her testimony. Civil rights groups reached out for partnerships. She was invited to deliver keynote addresses at scientific and ethical conferences worldwide. Some suggested she be considered for a cabinet position. Others floated her name for a future vice presidential run. She ignored all of it. Her mission was the same. In a private meeting with the president, held behind closed doors, Marsha was offered a formal apology and a national commendation. She refused the latter. "I'm not a symbol," she said. "I'm a scientist." The president nodded. "And yet, the nation sees you as both." She left the meeting as she had entered, without a camera crew, without aides, without commentary. But the effect lingered. In the days that followed, senior officials across law enforcement began calling for new training protocols. The Department of Homeland Security initiated a review of how federal credentials were processed by local systems. Congress scheduled a special session on interagency cooperation and civil oversight. NASA, for its part, launched a mentorship program in Marsha's name for underrepresented students in science and technology fields. The press praised it as timely. Marsha insisted it had been in planning for a year. The young man, Isaac, who had made the call to Space Force, was awarded a personal internship by Marsha's office. His parents, both immigrants from Nigeria, appeared with him at a small private ceremony where Marsha handed him his badge herself. No photographers were present. Just staff, family, and a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes one clear decision in a moment of chaos can change everything. In a rare televised address, General Conwell spoke to the nation's military leaders. "We failed to protect someone who protects this nation's future," he said, "and we must never let that happen again." He ordered an immediate overhaul of internal coordination protocols and required every officer across Space Force divisions to undergo federal identification recognition training. What began as a personnel issue had now become institutional reform. Marsha, meanwhile, continued her work without pause. She oversaw the testing of a new propulsion system designed for deep-orbit communication satellites. She chaired 2 international symposia via secure video links. She approved new hires, adjusted budget forecasts, reviewed policy briefings, and in between all of it, she returned the emails of students who had written to her with stories of what the video had meant to them. They wrote of classroom taunts, job rejections, family dismissals, and silent discouragement. They wrote of seeing someone like themselves in power and being told, without words, that excellence was not enough. Then they saw her stand, silent, upright, unshaken, and they believed again. One message came from a young girl in Atlanta. "I used to think science was for someone else. After watching you, I know it's for me." Another came from a veteran in Kansas. "Ma'am, I've seen a lot, but I've never seen anyone stand still and shake a system like that." She replied to both. She replied to every single one. At the end of the week, Marcia returned to the same cafe where it all began. She entered alone, the same quiet confidence in her step, though now the barista's eyes widened with recognition. "I didn't think you'd come back," she whispered. Marcia smiled gently. "Why not?" The coffee was free. The seat by the window was left empty, as if waiting for her. She took it, sipped slowly, and stared out at the street where the memory still lived. The memory that had become a message. The message that had become a movement. For a moment, the world seemed still again. Not because it was quiet, but because she had made it listen. The world did not end when the media storm calmed. No great rupture split through the streets of Washington. No sweeping declarations were made once the hearings concluded and the hashtags faded from the top of digital platforms. Life resumed its careful pace as it always did, quietly weaving extraordinary moments back into the ordinary. But for those who had seen what happened, for those who had felt it, the world had shifted, however subtly. And for Marcia Hunt, the silence that followed was not absence. It was culmination. At NASA headquarters, the rhythms of space continued. Satellites orbited on schedule, projects advanced in their phases, international calls were placed, encrypted, and logged. Launch windows were recalculated with millisecond precision. Within the sterile brilliance of the command centers and testing labs, the urgency of exploration pulsed on. But now, wherever Marcia went within those walls, there was a new kind of recognition, not born of celebrity or sympathy, but something heavier, more permanent. A recognition of a woman who had not only survived the blow, but reshaped its impact with dignity and design. Her wrists had healed, the bruises faded, but the memory of the medal never left her. She had not asked for symbolic gestures, but the board of directors quietly voted to fund a permanent scholarship in her name, focused on students from underserved communities pursuing aerospace engineering. She allowed it without comment, and the foundation launched within a month. Isaac began his internship a week after the charges against the officers were formalized. He arrived early, every day, and left only when Marcia herself told him it was time. He asked questions not out of curiosity but necessity, and his hunger for knowledge reminded her of who she had been at 19, desperate to believe that the mind alone could elevate someone beyond their birthright. He would go far. She would make sure of it. In the Pentagon, the Defense Oversight Committee completed its internal review. Their findings were sobering: gaps in jurisdictional awareness, failures in local recognition systems, and a persistent bias in the interpretation of threat levels based on race and gender, even among those with impeccable credentials. Marcia read the report in full, annotated it, and returned it with suggested amendments. Less euphemism, more accountability. The president signed a new directive mandating the integration of federal clearance identifiers into all state-level law enforcement databases. The measure passed with bipartisan support, though no one failed to notice that it only came after her story had been forced into public reckoning. But Marcia did not speak again to the media. She declined invitations from morning shows and panel discussions. She refused interviews, book offers, documentary proposals. She understood the hunger for narrative but she was not interested in feeding it. She had already spoken once, and the echo of that moment still rang clear. What she did instead was work. In the West Wing of NASA's newest building, she supervised the final pre-launch simulations for the Helios Array, a series of deep space communications satellites that would link exploratory vessels beyond Mars. The project had consumed years of development, but now, after all that had happened, it felt like a personal redemption, a reminder that even as the Earth turned heavy with its flaws, they still reached for stars that answered to no man. The launch was scheduled for the following month, and the team moved with reverent focus. Engineers, analysts, software leads, they worked late into the night, knowing who led them. It was not fear that drove their excellence, but alignment. She did not rule with charisma or fire. She ruled with gravity. One evening, just past midnight, Marcia stood alone on the observation deck, looking over the rows of monitors in the silent control room. The city beyond the glass shimmered in soft amber, and above it the sky stretched wide and black, vast and unconcerned. Somewhere out there, the satellites she had helped envision drifted in serene orbits, transmitting whispers from one end of the dark to another. The door behind her opened, and General Conwell entered. He removed his hat out of courtesy, not protocol, and stepped beside her without speaking. For a long while they both simply looked outward, sharing the quiet. "They're finalizing the plea deals," he said at last. "I expected as much. Lanning will do time. Bridges will be barred from any government work. Internal Affairs is making them the example." Marcia nodded. "That's the easy part." Conwell looked at her. "You're not satisfied." "Satisfaction isn't the goal," she said. "Structure is." He considered that. "You built structure out of chaos. We all saw it." She didn't reply. "They're naming the new orbital station's command module after you," he added. "We thought you should know." She looked at him then, not surprised but contemplative. "A name is only useful if it holds." "It will," he said. They parted without ceremony. In the weeks that followed, the headlines moved on, as they always did. Another crisis, another scandal, another face to fixate on. But in science classrooms, in code academies, in high school debate clubs and university lecture halls, her name continued to surface. Not as a footnote, but as a case study, a demonstration of poise under pressure, a lesson in systems, both their failures and their potential. One day, in an auditorium filled with aerospace students, a young woman asked her what it felt like in that moment. Pressed against her car, restrained, unseen. Marcia paused. "It felt like standing at the edge of atmosphere," she answered, "just before the burn fades and space begins. Violent, inevitable, silent. But once you break through, there's nothing left to push against. Just momentum." She left it there. The Helios launch succeeded. The array deployed perfectly. Signals returned faster than expected. The international scientific community celebrated a new era of communication, crediting the NASA team with a breakthrough that would ripple for decades. At the post-launch reception, Marcia stood by the edge of the platform, drink in hand, watching her engineers laugh and argue and toast each other with the joy of accomplishment. She allowed herself a small smile. She had given them the conditions to succeed. That was enough. A junior officer approached with a velvet box in hand. "They asked me to give this to you," he said. Inside was a silver medallion engraved with the words, "For vision beyond limits." She closed the box gently. "I already have what I need," she said, placing it on the table and walking back toward the stars. Behind her, the party continued. Before her, the future opened wide, and above, in the silence of space, her name traveled endlessly, orbiting the Earth without permission, without apology, without end. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video and explore others on the channel. And if you think someone needs to see this, share it.